Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Hank Cardello. I head up the Leadership Solutions program here at Georgetown University. Welcome to everybody. I do have an observation. I noticed that whenever anyone comes into a library, it's quiet. It's very quiet in here. So hopefully we can liven it up for you this morning. Before I start, I do want to thank all the Georgetown staff here have done a terrific job. The NCA staff helping them out, very much appreciated. I also want to thank my co-author, Richard Black. He's been a terrific addition to help me on this white paper report. We're going to talk about indulgent products today, all right? Hopefully some fun stuff, but also part of the issue as it relates to what we're trying to do with health. And we're going to go through a detailed white paper. I'll give you some overviews from the white paper, and then we'll have a panel discussion. And then we want to, more importantly, open it up to questions from you. There's also plenty of people online, and we'll accept their questions. But before we get started, I do want to introduce our esteemed panelists. My far right here is Anton Vincent. Anton is the president of Mars Wrigley North America, and he sells those iconic brands, Snickers, Twix, etc. And I also found out through the grapevine that Anton likes, his favorite food is Skittles. So remember that.
One of my favorites.
And one of your favorites, yeah. You have to like all of them, Anton.
Yeah.
All right. Also, I've learned that Anton, prior to Mars, was at General Mills, where I started in brand management several centuries ago. And he was involved in the snack business, the frozen business, and the baking side of the house. So he's really seen an awful lot of product categories, knows the way they operate and how they impact consumers and what consumers do with those products. Also, he was involved in the acquisition that General Mills made of Pillsbury, and also did a lot of acquisition work as it relates to their natural and organic products. So again, he's seen all sides from the business perspective. I also want to mention that Anton has been recognized for his leadership. He's been named one of the most influential African Americans in corporate America, and in Minneapolis, the Minority Executive of the Year. So welcome, Anton, and thank you so much for being here. And then next to Anton is Bill Dietz, Dr. Bill Dietz, I have to say doctor. Bill really is a luminary in the public health space. Bill is the director of the Sumner Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness in the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. See, I got it all out in one sentence. Bill really has been involved very early on the issue of obesity. Bill previously headed the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's division on nutrition, physical activity, and obesity. He's really been the face of this problem. He's also one of the co-chairs of the Lancet Commission on Obesity, which really issued a landmark report on what things look like and what has to happen between now and 2050 to make some impact and changes regarding food consumption to address that issue. Bill has a litany of kudos, if you would. He's past president of the American Society of Clinical Nutrition. He's also a member of the National Academy of Medicine and has published over 200 pieces. So again, Bill, thank you for joining me again on these kind of panels. I appreciate it very much. So let me get started. What we'll do today is I'll briefly, for about 10 minutes, just go through the highlights coming out of the white paper. We'll have a little bit of Q&A with our panelists, and then again, most importantly, want to open up questions to you, the audience. So briefly, I am part of Business for Impact here in the McDonough School of Business. And, we have, our mission really is to leverage businesses' capabilities for good. We've learned that doing good is also good for business. And we see this particular issue as fitting into that. So when we talk about indulgent products or food products and we talk about some health issues like obesity, clearly that's part of our role here. So the purpose of the white paper now, really we wanted to look at a number of things. First of all, on a policy standpoint, we wanted to be able to provide some better guidance as policy is determined and what the food industry can do. Secondly, we wanted to examine how consumers purchase products. Oftentimes you hear about what needs to be done to reduce sugar or salt, saturated fats, et cetera, when in reality, consumers don't go out and purchase a sugar, they purchase a snack bar or they drink a soda. So how do we bridge those gaps in explaining what can be done and how the different products are treated differently from each other? And finally, a biggie coming out of this research that we did for this paper is that one-size-fits-all approaches aren't really effective. All right, they don't really get the job done. So we'll go through this now. We'll give you some highlights coming out of the paper. Just a little background, again, what we did. This is more like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group type of analysis, where we've looked at some of our prior reports. We've looked at a lot of Natural Marketing Institute data. They do a lot of consumer segmentation, which is how we address the, what should I say, one size does not fit all, and also a lot of Robert Wood Johnson data and CDC and World Health Organization data, et cetera. So we've looked at both industry data and also public health data. So let's go through some of the key findings here. The biggie that we have really is that this is the essence of what we're talking about. When we compare people at a healthy weight, body mass index, compared to those with obesity, we see distinctions across product categories. So up at the top of your list, you'll see that sodas and sweet baked goods, packaged pastries, those kind of projects have a huge gap in the way those products are consumed, again, among those who are healthy versus those with obesity. And as you come down the list, down at the bottom, you see that chocolate and candy are pretty much consumed the same across the board, regardless of one's body mass index. And what we also found, that was consistent with an earlier piece of research we did looking at different kinds of segmentation. This is a consumer attitudinal segmentation, the well-beings all the way over to the eat, drink, and be merrys, and eat, drink, and be merry speaks for itself. But again, with this, there's no statistical difference across all these consumer groups in their consumption of chocolate and candy. So again, it signals to me that there's really no link, if you would, between consumption of these products and what we're seeing about obesity rates. When we look at calories consumed, again, the beverages clearly contribute the most, and secondly, the sweet baked goods along with those. And you can see products. We put in ready-to-eat cereals because they have been implicated for high sugar consumption in there, and you can see that they're really not contributing the same calories, same level of calories, and the same with the confectionery products. And then when you look at added sugars, which is a big hot button right now, again, really beverages are the category that are contributing the most, and secondarily, the sweet baked goods combined contribute about half of those, whereas the other categories really, barely show up in terms of the major impact. And then when we look at, let's just talk about just raw tonnage of food consumed per person per year. And again, you see the sweet baked goods and some of the savory snacks in there driving the boat. And the reason beverages are not in there, and again, I say this with all sincerity, having come out of the soft drink business, soft drinks really and sweetened beverages contribute a lot of pounds consumed of products, as I know some of you in the soft drink business understand. I also want to talk a little bit about portions. We're finding out that portions now are becoming a hot button for consumers. IFIC does an annual report on food and health, And for the first time, they found out that consumers are mentioning portions as a means to help them with a healthy diet. And that's new news. That wasn't in their data in the previous 5 years. This kind of proves a McKinsey study that was done several years ago, where they looked at something called disability-adjusted life years. In other words, what's the impact on somebody's healthy life going forward? And portions was the #1 means to help extend life in a healthy fashion for people, along with reformulation of food products. So again, we're seeing corroboration of that kind of evidence. And then finally, permissible indulgence is something that came out of some work we did in conjunction with the Partnership for a Healthier America. We found that in COVID, you had two almost divergent types of trends going on. One was, especially before the vaccine came out, it's like, oh, I have to do something to make myself healthier. What kind of foods can I be consuming? What can I drink, et cetera? You have that. At the same time, you have rising stress, anxiety, depression. People want comfort, all right? I want my comfort foods. So we're seeing that going forward, consumers are saying, yeah, I want both. Okay, I don't want either or, I want both. So this is the direction the consumer's going into. And I think this is a consideration for those in the food industry to take. And we'll see that, we've heard of the quarantine 15, that's kind of a real number. And that's for real. The current rates of obesity, as reported by the CDC, are 42%. I expect the next edition might be closer to 45%. Who knows? I'm afraid we may be pushing 50% by the end of the decade. So it's something we all have to step up and do something about. So before I close, I just want to provide some other policy considerations, especially as they're looking at SNAP programs, labeling, et cetera. One of the things we learned from this NANMI data is that many of those in this room tend to be well-beings, those who kind of get it, understand it, walk their talk. Well, we have to go meet our neighbors, and what this chart shows us is once you go to our friends to eat, drink, and be merry, and that pretty much describes who they are, they're saying, what's a label? Okay, I don't read labels, okay? I just eat and drink what I want. So my caution is I'm all for transparency. I think food companies need to be transparent and communicate what's in their products. At the same time, we have to be cautious that labeling might not solve all the problems for us, because the people who have the biggest problem with body mass index are the ones that are reading labels the least. And then also, a number of programs on the left side of the screen, you'll see in Chile and other South American countries, they're going to these, what they call black stop sign on labels. So if you're high in calories or sugar or salt or saturated fats, you get a black stop sign on your label. And what's interesting is the health department in Chile has reported that when you look at the end result, I think we have to be careful about what we try to tackle here. The end result here on obesity, it's still inching up, so it's a little frustrating that per se might not be addressing the problem. And then over here on the right in Mexico, they had the 12 teaspoons campaign, which is, again, pretty draconian. But again, we're seeing that obesity rates and overweight are going up. And I think the missing piece is that when you tax something, yes, sales of that product will come down. But what we're not really doing a good job of is finding out what they switch to. Everyone isn't all of a sudden switching over to drinking bottled water and eating nothing else. We have to really get a good handle on what they're doing. And I think once we do that, then that'll give us much better guidance as to how we can reformulate products and what we can do with policy. The other thing that's coming out of this, there have been some good commitments. I'll go through some of these, recap. That 400% one is the first one, that was done by the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation companies, 16 CPG companies, packaged goods companies, and they pulled out 6.4 trillion calories out of the food supply. Okay, that was a big accomplishment for them. The beverage companies then chimed in They did a $100+ million campaign. They focused on smaller portions, reducing sugar, broadening the choices of lower calorie offerings for them. They've also committed to take out another 20% of the calories by 2025. So again, I've always felt they were late to the game. On the other hand, I feel they're doing the right thing now. And then, of course, up top there, top left, the confectionery industry made Always a Treat initiative, where they announced last week that they accomplished their goals with the Partnership for a Healthy America, where half the products now are 200 calories or less for individual servings. And also 90%, and actually 94% of the products now have calories listed on the front of pack. So key takeaways, and you bottom line it, well, they're not all created the same. We have to be looking across different products to really come up with some smart strategies on policy. Interestingly, candy is kind of the anomaly here. I remember speaking to a group of registered dietitians once, and we somehow got to talking about chocolate. And I said, well, what happens if we take away your chocolate? And they go, no. So don't do that. And by the way, another little factoid is among you well-beings in this audience, one of the products that indexes very high is Haagen-Dazs. So you can't hide now. We know the truth, what's going on there. So this product's, this whole segment is just different. It doesn't behave like the others. It isn't purchased as frequently. There's a chart in the handout there that shows even compared to potato chips, it's purchased half the frequencies. Soft drinks really and sweetened beverages are really a challenge. More needs to be done. They are doing a lot now. They need to continue doing this. I also would like to see sweet baked goods step up. And restaurants, now restaurants are a tough one because they're all struggling with their businesses right now. They have labor problems, the cost of ingredients are up, et cetera. So I think we have to give them a break to get up and running and survive. At the same time, I think there's a huge opportunity for them to get involved in addressing the obesity problem, especially since restaurant food and food service account for 30% of the calories. So they have to be part of the game with everybody else. And then again, portion balance, big factor here. I think it's a way for these kind of products to make an impact. So with that, if there's any questions after this, feel free to email me. I'll leave the email up here. And let's go chat with our panelists. We don't have the Bill Maher new rules music here. I want to open with Bill, because Bill again's been at the front lines of this for so long. And kind of like, what's the state of the union, so to speak, on dealing with obesity? Have we made progress? What are the challenges you're seeing? Is something going off the cliff the wrong way? I'd love to get your perspectives on it.
Well, thanks, Hank, and thanks for including me in this panel. It's nice to meet you, Anton, and hear the progress. Let me begin by just making a comment in response to the effects of COVID-19. It's quite clear that the group that was most at risk for excessive weight gain are 6 to 11-year-olds. And I think that's because of their reliance on school meals and the absence of school meals. And we know that school meals are associated with a reduction in the prevalence of obesity among low-income kids. The adult side, the data you quoted were really anecdotal. The more comprehensive studies have not shown a marked increase in the prevalence of obesity in adults. That's not to say that a lot of people don't gain weight during that, but that seems to be balanced by a lot of people who lose weight during COVID-19. But I think the other important observation with COVID-19 is the dramatic impact it's had on people with obesity. About 30% of people with obesity, the infection rates are increased. 30% of people with obesity who are hospitalized go on to the ICU, and there's an increase in mortality. So I think that emphasizes more than anything else recently the adverse effects of obesity. So as you pointed out, the prevalence of obesity has continued to rise. 42% of adults as of 2017-2018 had obesity. 19% of children and adolescents had obesity. And I think that as we talk about the food supply, we can't neglect the importance of physical activity. For example, we know that physical activity has reduced infections with COVID-19, reduced hospitalizations, and reduced mortality. And I think in the whole discussion of obesity, the physical activity side gets neglected. But that's a departure from our topic today. And I should make a declaration at the outset, two declarations actually. One of my favorites are Snicker bars.
You're on record, Bill.
Yeah, but I should add that I have those less than once a month.
Oh,
so,
sure. Well, we need to fix that. Right? Responsibly, of course.
Right. The other disclosure is that I'm on the board of PHA, and I think the progress that PHA has made in helping and working with industry is notable. It's one of the few organizations that has done so. The issue of portion size, I think, is one on which we should focus, but I think the emphasis has been misplaced. People don't consume calories, or their satiety is not regulated by calories. It's regulated by volume, so that the caloric density, that is the number of calories per unit mass, is really what regulates satiety. And I think that's a goal that industry has missed. It's not easy. I mean, if you think about your indulgent products, how do you create a product that has all the characteristics that make it desirable and yet has a reduced caloric density? And I know that one of the strategies there is to make it, to increase the water content, which also increases the risk of spoilage. But that's an area that I think is an area that's ripe for development, and certainly the field needs that kind of commitment, and you all are well suited to do the research. The other thing that I think is happening, and you pointed out our article in The Lancet in 2019, is that I think that the solutions to climate change and obesity are similar, that we need to move towards a more sustainable, more plant-based diet. And that's going to have an impact not only on climate change because of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also going to have an impact on obesity. So how do we do that? And I think what has disappointed me is that there was with the outbreak of COVID and its impact on obesity and people with obesity, is that didn't heighten the commitment to addressing obesity. And I know we may talk about the White House conference in a few minutes, but it's been a disappointment to me that obesity has not been a call out of that conference with a focus on more on hunger and food and nutrition insecurity. Nutrition insecurity is not the same as food insecurity. Nutrition insecurity means that people are not getting the right kind of food as opposed to the volume of food.
So I do want to come back to that because that's an important subject. You know, Bill raises some points about things that the food industry can be doing. So Anton, you know, from Mars' perspective, what are the kinds of things you're doing with your products? And again, you did have a recent announcement about your research R&D facility in Chicago. So what other capabilities do you have, and how do you bring some of that to bear?
Yeah, a couple of things. Let me just sort of start out with a Mars commercial. Look, first,
that
was one brand. No. But look, first I want to say thank you for allowing us to participate on the panel and bring your greetings from 135,000 global employees of Mars. Most people don't know Mars because we're a private family-owned company, but we actually primarily compete in 3 verticals. Confection being one of the biggest. We're also the largest pet care company in the world, everything from nutrition to veterinary hospitals to emergency rooms as well. And they also have a substantial food business as well. So I just want to say thank you guys for participating. Look, first, my predecessor was one of the really big proponents of us getting on board with this initiative. And so we were glad to be one of the primary pushers of what was going on here with treats. And so we're excited that we have achieved the goal. And I think one of the things we're doing at Mars is making sure that we just not achieve the goal, but we make it part of a business strategy. So let me give you an example. First of all, as we start to look to grow our business and expand our business, we have very much of a health and wellness and a nutrition lens on it. And so many of you know that we took a 60% interest in Kind back in 2017. We took out the rest of the 40% at the end of 2020, and now we own Kind outright. Right on the back of that, we actually purchased Nature's Bakery, and both of those were, I think, representative of our strategy in terms of how we're trying to make sure we're pushing in terms of health and wellness. As it relates to our existing portfolio, we've continued to try to make sure we get 100% of our products under 200 calories per serving, which is significant for us. Now, we've been at this for a long time. So over a decade or so ago, probably around 2014, 2013, we were one of the first ones to get it under 250 calories per serving. And so really it's a continuation of the strategy and supporting it both from a Mars perspective, but probably more importantly from an industry perspective as well. We've also sort of signed on with the global World Health Organization in terms of making sure that we're limiting intake of sugar to 10% as well. And so we're having impact both domestically, but also globally in terms of how we're trying to push and sell our goods in a very transparent and a very responsible way. And so those are very, very important to us. And I think you'll start to see us to continue to do that as well across our portfolio.
All right, thank you, Anton. Well, Bill, hearing that and also with your own perspectives, you know, the packaged goods companies, again, we reference the soft drink companies making their commitment to take out another 20% of calories, the commitment from the confectionery industry. What else would you like to see the food industry do? You know, more en masse, you know, not necessarily limited to packaged goods companies, but what else do you think needs to be done to help address this issue?
I think a major effort needs to be made to reduce advertising directed at children, because that's where it starts. I was on a federal panel years ago when I was still at CDC in which we set standards not for what should not be advertised to children, but what should be advertised to children. And of course, that met with disapproval from the fat industry, meaning the food and food, what was the A? I can't remember. Food advertising and television industries, the fat industry. But I still think that that has merit because that's where taste is really established. So I think that's still a number one consideration. I think it's unlikely to happen, but in response to your question, I think that's one of the things that needs to happen. Secondly, I think that obesity as a primary health issue has been neglected in this country, both in terms of prevention and treatment. Ironically, the focus has been on the prevention of obesity in children, whereas I think a focus on adult obesity may have a spin-off effect in reducing obesity in children. And I know this is not necessarily pertinent to this audience, but I think the absence of good treatment for a problem which affects 42% of Americans is almost criminal. I mean, there's no other disease that is as neglected as obesity. And I think part of that has to do with the stigma and bias directed towards obesity. So I would hope that people in this room would begin to talk about people with obesity as opposed to obese people. Obese people and an obese person is an identity, whereas a person with obesity has a disease. And I think that's a dividing point, because the term obesity in public discourse is a pejorative. In medical discourse, it's a diagnosis. And I think shifting the focus on obesity from a personal failing to one which demands medical treatment is an essential step forward.
You know, we talked a little bit earlier about this upcoming White House conference. I'm wondering, Anton, if you have any thoughts on that conference and what you might be thinking about the opportunities for public-private types of collaboration. You know, is there still room for that? You know, one of my observations has been, at least going back to the earlier days, sometimes it was more like a kumbaya, you know, type of thing. We got together, okay, we got together in the room when we went home. It seems to me it needs to go further from that. And one of my concerns might be coming out of this that we don't want to do anything that's too draconian where the industry doesn't come along and you have a partnership to advance some solutions to the problem, but I'd love to get your perspectives.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say, I speak for Mars, and I hope I speak for the industry. We're for joining any initiative that's going to solve the problem. I think that's the biggest piece I think that we always sort of think about as well. And I know many of us have been involved with efforts in the past, going back to First Lady Obama. We're very involved in that as well. And so I like the effort. I think we're all waiting to understanding how that's going to shape and form and frame itself, and then how do we sort of participate from an industry perspective in a very productive and a very active way, again, where it's going to solve the problem. So I think we're excited to see what the White House has and what they're open to partner with as well. And I think industry is more than willing to step up and do its part.
So before I go to Bill, I just wanted to ask you a question. We talked about this permissible indulgence that came out of some of our earlier research. I'm just curious as to, again, from Mars' lens, how you view that concept and how you're dealing. The one thing that people need to understand about packaged goods companies is, one thing really well, and that's consumers, all right? And I think that's a gap that the public health community could take advantage of, that kind of understanding of consumer behavior and how it is that that potentially gets influenced. But the notion of permissible indulgence, I mean, how is that wrapped into some of your product initiatives, either the current ones or some of the new ones?
Yeah, I think it's wrapped in a couple of ways. First of all, consumers have choice, and consumers understand the concept around choice. And, confections has a very specific role in people's lives. And so I think part of our perspective is, how do we sort of fulfill that role, fulfill that need, again, in a very transparent and in a very responsible way. And I think we'll continue to do that as well. One of the things that we try to focus on is making sure we understand not just the segmentation, but what is behind the segmentation? What is the value system that is driving, both at a high level and at nutritional levels, what is it driving consumption? And then how do we sort of play into that? One of the things I want to just support, and I know that Mars, we have made it our part of our marketing guidelines where we do not market to children under the age of 12. And so we understand the responsibility behind that, and we think we're pretty good marketers. We think we can do it without, quote unquote, targeting children. And do it in a way where we're still offering choice. And that's very, very important for us. And I think combining those two concepts, we have an opportunity to sort of push our business in a very responsible way and still provide choice to the consuming public. Yeah.
So now I'll ask you about the White House.
Well, first of all, I endorse Mars's position. That's been terrific.
Just want to give you some thoughts. I did write a piece in Forbes recently, and I was thinking that, the response we had to COVID-19, was, especially in developing the vaccines, was very Manhattan Project-like, if you would. Does addressing obesity, treating it as a pandemic with that kind of effort, in your opinion, is that the kind of effort that's needed?
Definitely. Will it happen? I don't know. The pandemic certainly didn't make it happen, and there was no more dramatic effect of obesity on that pandemic than any other thing that we've seen, and that didn't really mobilize the population or the medical sector. And I think we're still kind of in the post-COVID years of absorbing what has happened to us. I think that, as I think everyone in this room knows, that the White House conference and its organization has been confusing. And even to the extent of knowing what potentially might emerge. I think one of the things that we're going to see, and I know is happening because PHA is involved in it, is more commitments, which was what PHA was really established to achieve. And now that role may be reprised. But I think that the likely success, well, the likelihood that this White House conference will be as successful as the one in the Nixon administration is unlikely. I don't think that the organization has been as thorough. I don't think the mobilization has been as universal. And I think leaving people confused about what might emerge has really, I think, hampered the likelihood that anything significant will emerge. I hope I'm wrong, but that's been my experience.
You think industry should take a more proactive role there, or be given? I call it a seat at the adult table instead of the kids' table.
Absolutely. No, I think, and from the beginning, that the food industry can play and should play a major role. I think innovation is going to be required. The kinds of commitments that Mars made, that the early commitment around reducing calories in the food supply, those are very significant steps. So I think the challenge for industry is what would match that. I'm not sure what would match that, but I think industry probably could figure that out in a better way than those of us in the public health sector.
Well, that's a healthy viewpoint. I mean, I think I would hope to hear more of that kind of viewpoint coming out of this conference. I think thank you, gentlemen, for this. They're going to stay here, and what we'd like to do is open up questions to the audience, so you get a chance to ask on your own. If you can kindly identify yourself and who you're with, and also who you are directing your question to. And unfortunately, we have bright lights in our face, so we need some help seeing who has some questions. And I know you're not shy, so. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sierra, and I'm a student in the MSFS program. And I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to just start with this one. And this can go to both of you, since you both were offering your perspectives today. But how do you feel that poverty intersects with the perspectives that you were talking about today and the sources of the problem of obesity, as well as the solutions that you spoke of today?
Yeah, I'll start. I think poverty has an intersection to everything in society. Let me just sort of say that. Having come from a rural state, highly urbanized area down south, and I think also, particularly when you think about nutrition and what role it plays in the quality of nutrition in those households that would sort of fall under the poverty level, I think is really incredible. So again, I think it goes back to choice, and then how do we make sure those choices are balanced across the nutritional palette, but making sure that those choices are available in a way where it's not working against someone that has a lower income in that case as well. So I think it's very important, and that's part of our broader business strategy, making things affordable, but not degrading our quality in order to sort of go and target a household as well. So I think the intersection is pretty clear.
Yeah, I would agree. I think to your question about poverty, I would add race, because there are major racial disparities with respect to obesity. And the reason that I would add race is that I think that access is a major problem that determines food intake. So if you look in this city, as you well know, in Anacostia, Ward 7 and 8, there's one grocery store for every 60,000 people. In Ward 6, it's about 1 per 20,000 people. So there are real disparities with respect to access. Even if you have access to corner stores, the kinds of foods that are provided at corner stores are those which are mostly ultra-processed, soda, chips, and other foods that have a long shelf life and that are inexpensive and, to their credit, are tasty, but they're also obesogenic. And those corner stores don't stock fruits and vegetables. Even if they did, the problem of cost is a big one. So poverty and race, I think, underlie the disparities that we see in obesity. And we saw that a lot during COVID with food and nutrition insecurity, that those people who were most affected were people in poverty and the essential workforce. 10% or 15% of the essential workforce works in the food supply chain, and those people were disproportionately affected.
Thank you for the question. Yes, back there. Yes. Hang on, get your mic.
Roxy with the Bioethics Research Library. My question is, where is the fast food industry in all of this? For instance, McDonald's, a major supplier of food in low-income areas, largely because of price, and also the reality that McDonald's delivered during COVID. So you could get your McDonald's and never leave your home. So they were like on their A game in that respect, but the calories are out of bounds, and they're providing a lot of food without nutrition.
I'll tackle some of that. I may have mentioned that I felt that the restaurant industry as a whole is somewhat missing in action. on this. The packaged goods companies clearly have done a lot more. And the fact that the restaurant and food service account for 30% of the calories. You know, one chain that I see doing some good things, for instance, is Panera Bread. They have a number of commitments. They've improved the healthiness of their products. They have major sustainability commitments on top of that. And I'd like to see more and more of that. I do think, you know, McDonald's being the biggest player, you know, they're right there in the marquee, so they get the most criticism. They have done some good things with their, like the Happy Meals. They got rid of the fries and they put apples and they you know, they push water rather than the sodas. So they are doing some things. Maybe they can do more, but they are done. So I don't think we want to denigrate them because they are doing some things. But I would like to see the rest of the fast food industry step up the same way the packaged goods firms, like the confectionery firms, and even the soda firms are doing a lot now. We can say they didn't do enough early, but they are doing a lot now. So I do have a clarion call for that industry to step up. Yes, this gentleman right here. Oh, we got one back there, and then I'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Tafaria Williams. I'm here with Department of Aging and Community Living. Just a disclaimer, I am a registered dietitian, so I am going to be a little biased with my questions. But one of the things that I've noticed is that we are doing more to improve the calories. We are doing more to focus on the obesity. I'm very happy that it's a diagnosis and not just an item that we label people with anymore. And it actually requires treatment and help. But my focus is what are we doing to educate the community more on these food changes and why they're important. I've noticed that the soda industry has switched to using non-sugar sweeteners to make things lower calorie, but they do have effects on our body as well. Are we educating people on how to consume the food items? So even though you may make your bars 20 or 200 calories, is that one serving or is that 2 servings? Are we educating more people on how to eat the foods and consume them? I'm mostly big on being a non-diet dietitian. I feel like all foods have a place. You can have your Snickers more than once a month. That's your choice. But are we shaming anyone who eats it maybe once a week?
Yeah, I'll start. Look, first of all, I absolutely agree with you. I think there's more that we can do to make sure that we educate people around how to consume our products. So I'll be the first one to sort of say that. I think I'll speak from Mars' perspective as well. Let's just sort of take Snickers. Snickers actually has a decent amount of protein in it because a large portion of its gram content is peanuts, right? Now, we talk about that some. I can tell you we're going to talk about that more. And again, I think the thing we have to do is to make sure that we're still advocating all the great things for balance without overdoing it and without overpromising. It still is a part of a choice. It is still part of a balanced diet. You always hear us say that. There'll always be the inference, certainly in advertising as well. But I do think we can do more, and I think all companies are looking at ways that they can educate people around how to consume. So it's not to consume, but it's actually how to consume it in a very responsible way. So again, I would say 2 things. One, around transparency, what's in it. Second is around how to consume it. And I still think there's ways for us to do that where everybody can win.
I think your question, I think, is a good one, but is really based on the premise that if people are better educated, they're going to make better choices. And I think that the prior question about McDonald's is a good one to think about because what continues, the environment that fosters reliance on McDonald's is based on subsidies for cattle production and their fodder. I mean that's a protected kind of group. On the physical activity side, it's gas taxes that sustains that system. But I believe that until we deal with that kind of the way those decisions are being made and the environments that they foster, we're not going to make a lot of progress on this. And that's where I think this nexus of climate change and obesity come together, that common solutions would change the kind of food supply chain, if you will, to make the environment more conducive to the right choices.
Okay. Gentleman here had a question. Third row.
Hello, good morning. I'm Alex. I'm with the epidemiology program here at Georgetown. And my question is, so we have spoken about some companies doing the right thing and, you know, cutting back on some of the unhealthy items in some of their products. And we want to see more businesses take on that standpoint of ensuring that there's healthy options in their foods. But we still see that in certain areas, particularly, let's just take DC for example, we see that in certain areas, other products are marketed more than others, right? So, for example, something that is less healthy might be cheaper in, you know, it just might be cheaper. And people, you know, because of their income might be gravitated to getting that. How is it that we can have businesses lessen the unhealthy stuff that they're putting in these products and still have it be at an affordable price that people can get the proper nutrition that they need?
Looking at me. Yeah, I got that one. Well, first of all, look, it is a problem. It is a concern. I do think one of the things we have to do, and you know, part of it is economics, and part of it is choice. The economics is, if I am going to make it affordable, then by design I have to do something to that formulation to make it affordable, right? And the trick is, how do we do that in a way where it works for everybody? That's number one. The second thing is, what I think we've been doing as in industry is just making sure we attack it from the portion size perspective as well. I think it's very important. Number one, it actually gets calories down, and it actually attacks the affordability piece as well. And so I do think that there is a matrix that business organizations have to sort of think about, and making sure they can still sell their products in a very responsible way, but also making sure that the ingestion of those products, again, in the context of a balanced diet, still works for choice for that consumer as well. So I think the pressure's on the industry to sort of do that, and making sure that we're talking about it in the right way. The thing we never want to do is to give someone the assumption that they need to overconsume our products. Nobody in our industry wants to do that, but still make choice. It's very important for us. And so we have to just make sure we continue to be creative, but part of it is making sure that we manage that matrix of levers we have to pull to ensure that we can offer it at a price that works without overpromising, and making sure that the concept of nutrition and the concept of consumption is aligned.
The other thing I would just add to that is the targeted marketing. That we know that the marketing directed at black people is different than the marketing directed at white people, particularly for the sugary drink industry. I don't know about your industry, but I think that's a real issue.
I was going to ask Anton, if there is a program, let's say a public program that provides, let's use the term incentives, to industry to really crank up its R&D to address the issue of delivering affordable, healthier products that taste great. You think the industry would be receptive to that?
Yeah, well, I think the industry would be receptive without the incentive. Let's just sort of start there. Because look, part of our job is to make sure that we're advancing our business proposition in a very responsible and a very long-term way. So I think anything that's reasonable and makes sense, we're going to do that on our own. If there are incentives and those incentives help solve the problem, I think industry would jump on that for sure.
Well, my thinking is that the food industry, unlike, let's say, pharmaceutical industry, spends on average, 1 to 2% of its sales on R&D, and a lot of it on marketing. It's just the nature of the industry. So if there were a way to up the R&D spending as a percent of sales, that might augment and accelerate a number of the breakthroughs. Because when I was in the soft drink business, grape Sprite is the big innovation, all right? And that's not really what we're talking about here. We're trying to get products that actually can go the next level, be a quantum leap. And I think that's what we were talking about earlier, hoping something like that might come out of the White House. So we don't know, but I think a program like that might help.
Yeah, I mean, programs are great, but in order for us to survive, we have to innovate. And I would say everybody in our industry is really focused on innovation, and innovation solves a lot of problems. And I think part of that innovation matrix has to be how do we continue to make things good for people and attractive to people by obviously reducing the things that are not so good for them if they're overconsumed, and trying to increase those things that are good for them if they consume it as well. But again, I don't think it necessarily takes a program to do that. We have to be innovators, and I think we have a lot of commitment in being innovators in the confections industry.
Thank you. Yes, young lady here.
Hi, I'm Anita Rao. I'm a professor in marketing at the McDonough School of Business. So, and my research is actually studying asymmetric information between firms and consumers, the fact that firms often know more than consumers. So I found it interesting that you mentioned that consumers don't, especially consumers policymakers might care more about, don't necessarily read the labels that are on the products. And so it got me thinking about voluntary labels and why different firms slap on voluntary labels, like low calorie or no toxic ingredients, not in the food industry, but or no high fructose corn syrup. And how do we think of that as maybe influencing consumers' decisions? And maybe we should think of perhaps mandating that there should not be voluntary labeling, especially only when some firms do it as a differentiating advantage. And when I say low calorie, maybe my competitor is also low calorie, but they're not saying it because it's not mandated, right? So I don't know how, this is both like a policy as well as industry question that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I just want to clarify, what is the question you're asking? I'm sorry.
No, so how do you think of voluntary labeling, right? So if your competitor is putting on a low-calorie label on their, say, candy or on their chocolate bar, when that might not necessarily be true, because what does low-calorie really mean, right? Is it relative to the most sugary product out there? Is it relative to the average product out there? And do we think that that needs to be kind of regulated in some sense, that not everyone should be putting in a voluntary label? Or do we think competition will take care of itself and consumers are smart enough to figure this out themselves?
Yeah, so first of all, when it takes to voluntary labels, look, there are requirements, some regulatory in terms of when we actually put those labels out there, they're actually meeting a standard. That standard is very clear, and so there should be some understanding of that. Now, back to your point, consumers may not understand what that standard is, but there are standards. And so if you see a label out there that's, in this case, low calorie, that is true. The question is, what's the reference point? Right, and making sure that those consumers understand what the reference point is. That's number one. Number two, I think one of the things we're always trying to do, I'll get back to my central theme, which is choice. Because if it's a lower calorie, trust me, there's probably something that's higher calorie right next to it. And so we're saying, look, there's something that has higher calorie, maybe a different profile that you might like, but we also have an option for you to indulge in the category, indulge in the brand, what have you, where you could feel better and obviously have lower calorie intake as well. So I support voluntary labeling. I'll get back to what we were talking about earlier, is making sure that consumers understand what that means, right? That they have a really good understanding around what that means, and they have the opportunity to make that choice. I think that's the responsible part of it from our perspective is, are we giving them choice, and is that choice understood? And so there's two parts to that. So I think it's very important we do that. So I'm for them, as long as we make sure that the education around what they mean is clear.
So from the public health perspective, I think front of pack labeling should be mandatory. The one example that I think is really relevant is the Chilean example, which you may be familiar with, in which fat, sugar, and salt have been front of pack labeled in a black box that I think you mentioned. And we've seen changes in consumer purchasing based on those labels. Whether I think it's too early to say and too difficult perhaps to prove that that's going to have an effect on chronic disease rates. But I think that's where we should be focusing from the public health perspective.
Okay. This gentleman here.
Thank you. Eric Jaffe from the McCourt School of Policy. You touched on it in a couple of different formats when you talked about school lunches, and obviously that was highly visible in the Obama administration. Do you think industry did enough during that time around school lunches? And
Pandemic, you mean?
Well, I guess even before, with First Lady Michelle Obama's initiatives to try and bring it to the forefront about, access, especially for children in schools. and what was being served to students. And I guess from some perspectives, some would say that there were changes in some highly affluent areas. There were lasting changes, but a lot of the initiatives that were implemented kind of went by the wayside, especially in lower income areas, areas with non-white populations, things like that. Do you think there are lessons that can be taken from that for how to create more long-lasting change when we look to other initiatives?
Yeah. Yes, I think the standards for school meals during the Obama administration were model standards. You may not have seen the report by Steve Gortmaker and others I think it was in pediatrics, that looked at the effect of those changes on the healthy eating index in schools. And in low-income kids, there were major increases in the healthy eating index, not so much for middle-class or upper-class kids. But it's led me to think that as I mentioned earlier, there was like a 40% decline in the prevalence of obesity in low-income kids over what might be anticipated had the curves continued. That's led me to think that one of the most important strategies around the earlier question about poverty is universal school meals, free meals. I think that's a lift, but it's one that we could undertake and could be a significant obesity prevention mechanism that would have a broad population impact in much the way the earlier standards did. And I think the absence of those school meals was an important contributor to the rapid increase in prevalence of obesity that we saw during the pandemic in 6 to 11-year-olds. And that increase was disproportionately distributed to Black and Hispanic kids, there were increases in the white population, but not as dramatic as those in 6 to 11-year-olds.
Thank you.
I just want to sort of just add on to that. Look, first of all, I was at a prior company that's happened, but it also takes a force to make sure that those types of initiatives continues. Because look, I've been at the table with the former First Lady. She is formidable when she asks for things. And you need that energy because we did have a change of administration and a lot of the momentum behind that actually just waned. And then we happened to go into obviously COVID as well. But yeah, I think it takes sustained effort and it takes sustained leadership. I think if you have those things, you can do it. And I can tell you, if industry sees that there's sustained effort and sustained leadership, industry will go alongside of that as well. And I would say we have not had that sustained effort, that sustained energy, and that sustained leadership as well.
Question over here.
Hi, my name is Sumin. I'm also from the Public Policy Department. I ask as a non-American, so part of my ignorance, but my question goes back to the poverty question. So if we think we're trying to target and prevent, especially at the adult population, because that's what you spoke about, like the adult population being neglected, in America, are you allowed to use your SNAP money towards indulgent products? Because that seems to me, if they're allowed to do so, that seems to me as a kind of policy lever that the government could use. And if that's not restricted right now, what's stopping the policy change? Thank you.
You want that?
Well, I can start. The SNAP dollars are not restricted. And the most contentious area in terms of indulgent products has been soda. Which the public health community has targeted. But one of the things that I've learned about that debate is that SNAP is seen by the hunger community as an income supplement, not a food supplement. And therein lies the divide. And I've often thought that, about removing sugary drinks from SNAP benefits would be, as a federal strategy, would be discriminatory because if I'm a federal employee, why wouldn't I also be subject to that restriction? That's kind of a long a long argument that nobody has really resonated to, but it seems to me that it is discriminatory if you hold one group receiving federal benefits to a standard and not other groups that are receiving federal benefits to that same standard.
I've been ignoring this side. Yes. Can you?
Louder.
Thank you. Okay. So I know that we are discussing indulgent products, but you mentioned restaurants as well, and I wanted to ask about like American portion sizes because we know how important it is to portion, and I think something I've noticed and like a lot of people talk about is the absurd size of drinks in American fast food. And I've seen larges go up to 32 ounces, 18 ounces. And that's like a really big, like it diverges a lot from other fast food restaurants in other countries. Do you believe that it's feasible to change that or like work towards changing that? Or is it so ingrained into American culture that changing it would face significant backlash? And is it more important to reduce the caloric density of the drinks in the cup rather than the size of the cup?
Let me take a stab at it since you guys are punting. No, I think, first of all, the question came up earlier in the back there about McDonald's. And actually, they were the first ones to start capping the size of the drinks, all right? You have to remember that the reason they upsized the drinks in the first place is that the cost of liquid is like a penny an ounce, and then it costs another 2 or 3 cents by the time you throw in a lid in the cup and the straw in there. So it was a great way to make extra money. McDonald's has subsequently pared down on the size. Now you still have a couple of rogue chains out there, and I may be wrong on this. You know, if you go into a 7-Eleven type chain or something, you need a tripod to roll out some of these drinks to your car. That's driven by economics. Do I think they can do better? Yes. I mean, if you have more low-calorie drinks then you don't really care. But the point is, it doesn't work that way. So again, this I'll go back to the initial premise, and that is the restaurant industry, I think, has an opportunity to come in, set up some standards, all right, for what they'll do and what they won't do, and get their major chains to get involved in this problem. I think that'll be a big step that needs to be taken by that industry.
Isn't the 7-Eleven biggest drink the Big Gulp, which is 60 ounces?
And double gulps
Yeah,
and
right.
quadruple gulps.
Yeah.
My cup holder doesn't hold these things in my car. All right, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Katrina, and I'm a sophomore in the SFS. And so I guess a good way to close would be, we spoke a lot about really understanding the environment and the factors that lead individuals to consume, and it's both poverty and race. I would add geographical factors in there that all lead to this. And I almost believe that the White House conference demonstrates the intersection of all of these factors and bringing these contributors and stakeholders to the table to have an opportunity to discuss all of these to better the health of Americans is a really great opportunity. So how do you believe having this opportunity to really discuss how these factors intersect and see this as a way to combine these both like food waste, both nutrition, instead of viewing it as prioritizing one over the other, how can we make policy that takes all of these together to affect Americans?
So I think the thing to pay attention to is not what's going to happen at the White House conference, but what's going to follow the White House conference. Because the original White House conference was preceded by dozens of working groups working on different policy initiatives. And that hasn't happened here. There's been a number of listening sessions, and I think among others, the Tufts group has tried to synthesize some of those. But I think that the White House conference is likely to be a showcase, and what is going to follow or should follow are working groups that are empowered around recommendations for major changes in the food supply and physical activity. It turns out physical activity is one of the pillars of this conference. So it's not been neglected, but that's my suggestion. And I'll follow it closely too.
Thank you all so much for coming. Please join me in thanking our panelists for a great job here. We hope you got something out of this session, and enjoy yourselves. For those from Georgetown, enjoy the rest of your semester. Thank you for coming. Thank you from industry for coming, and also from public health. Thank you.